Imagine coming home on your anniversary expecting the usual quiet dinner, but instead the door clicks open to a trail of rose petals, flickering candles, and your wife's sister grinning like she knows a secret that could change everything. What if tonight wasn't just celebration? What if it was a wake-up call to the love you'd almost let slip away? Stick around because this one's going to hit you right in the heart. Ryan Evans was a man who liked order. Stays followed a steady rhythm: wake early, coffee with 2 sugars, a quick workout, then straight to work at his marketing firm in downtown Seattle. He was dependable, consistent, and rarely surprised. That was why the strange feeling in his chest on this particular Friday unsettled him. It was his anniversary, 7 years since he had married Emily Carter, the woman who had turned his once simple world into something fuller, richer, and sometimes chaotic in the best ways. All day, Ryan couldn't concentrate. Numbers on reports blurred. Emails went unanswered, and his co-workers noticed him tapping his pen more than usual. At first, he blamed it on deadlines, but deep down, he knew it was something else. There was an energy in the air, a quiet pull he couldn't explain. This morning, Emily had kissed him goodbye with a softness that lingered longer than usual, her eyes sparkling in a way that almost hinted at a secret. And then there was Claire, Emily's younger sister, who had dropped by their apartment last night with a mischievous smile. As she left, she had leaned close to Ryan and whispered, "Don't be late tomorrow. You'll regret it if you are." Those words had haunted him through meetings, through his lunch break, and even now as he checked the time on his computer screen, 60:30. He usually stayed late at the office, but tonight he found himself shoving papers into his bag before anyone else had left. Something was waiting for him at home, something he couldn't name. The drive back to their apartment was faster than usual. Rain streaked across the windshield. Headlights reflected on the wet asphalt, and Seattle's familiar traffic buzzed around him. But Ryan barely noticed. His thoughts drifted to Emily. Their marriage had not always been smooth. Arguments about money. Moments of distance, weeks when he buried himself in work and she felt unseen. Yet, despite it all, there was a bond he couldn't explain, a love that had survived storms. He wondered if tonight would be another reminder of why they had lasted this long. As he pulled into the underground parking, he remembered their very first anniversary. Back then, they were still figuring each other out, still shy about voicing expectations. Emily had cooked him spaghetti that night, burning the garlic bread, and they laughed until their stomachs hurt. Now, years later, life felt heavier. They carried responsibilities, regrets, and unspoken fears. Maybe that was why he felt nervous climbing the stairs to their apartment. What if tonight was more than just dinner and flowers? The door unlocked with a soft click. Instantly, Ryan froze. The apartment was different. Shadows danced across the walls, glowing with the flicker of candlelight. The faint sound of music drifted from the living room, something soft and melodic, the kind of song Emily used to play on rainy Sunday mornings. His pulse quickened. He stepped inside, his shoes brushing against rose petals scattered on the floor. The air was rich with the scent of flowers, roses, lilies, and something faintly sweet like vanilla. He dropped his keys into the bowl by the door, but didn't move farther. For once he didn't know what to do. "Ryan," a voice called gently. He looked up and his breath caught. Emily stood in the doorway, framed by the glow of candles. She wore a navy blue dress that hugged her frame with quiet elegance, her hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. But it wasn't just her beauty that startled him. It was the emotion in her eyes, a mix of nervousness and joy, as though she was holding back tears. And then he saw Claire. She was beside Emily, dressed simply, yet glowing with the same mysterious energy. She smiled warmly, her eyes shining with a secret she wasn't ready to share. For a moment, Ryan felt the world tilt. Why was she here? Why, tonight of all nights? "Happy anniversary!" Emily whispered, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Ryan's throat tightened. He had imagined flowers. Maybe a dinner reservation, a quiet evening, just the two of them. But this felt like something bigger, something he hadn't been prepared for. The sisters exchanged a quick glance, as though they shared a secret language he wasn't privy to, and Ryan realized with a jolt that tonight was not about routine, it was about revelation. Emily walked forward, her hand brushing his, grounding him. Claire stood back, almost like a guardian of the moment, her presence deliberate yet comforting. Ryan's mind spun with questions, but his heart thumped too loudly to voice them. All he could do was follow. Emily led him deeper into the apartment. Each step revealed more of the transformation. The living room had been turned into something magical, strings of fairy lights along the windows. Photographs of their journey together laid out on the table, and a soft quilt draped across the couch as if inviting them to sink into it later. Everything had been planned with intention, every detail whispering of love and care. Ryan felt a lump in his throat. He was not a man easily moved, but something about the effort, the secrecy, and the unity of Emily and Claire's actions stirred emotions he had buried. Tonight wasn't about routine or obligation, it was about something he didn't yet understand. He glanced at Emily, then at Claire, both of them watching him with expectant eyes. "What's all this?" he asked finally, his voice lower than he intended. Emily smiled softly, but it was Claire who answered. "You'll see. Just trust us." And for the first time in years, Ryan allowed himself to surrender control. Ryan followed Emily into the living room, his shoes brushing against the petals scattered across the hardwood floor. The glow of the candles made the space look completely different, warmer, almost unreal, as if he had walked into a dream. The scent of roses and something faintly sweet drifted in the air, filling his chest with both comfort and tension. He wanted to ask questions, but the weight in Emily's eyes kept him silent. She stood close, her hand lingering on his arm, as though she feared he might slip away. Claire remained near the dining table, arranging something he couldn't yet see. Her movements were calm, almost graceful, and Ryan noticed how naturally she fit into the moment, as if this night belonged to her too. "Sit," Emily said softly, guiding him toward a chair. Her voice was steady, but Ryan could hear the tremor underneath. He obeyed, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare speak aloud. The dining table, usually covered with bills and leftover magazines, had been transformed, a crisp white cloth draped across it, and at the center stood a vase of fresh roses. Two plates rested on top of gold-rimmed chargers, and tall candles burned steadily on either side. Between them sat a covered dish, steam slipping through the edges. Claire placed another bowl beside it, then caught Ryan's gaze and smiled. "You didn't think we'd let your anniversary pass unnoticed, did you?" She teased, her voice carrying a warmth that was both comforting and unsettling. Ryan swallowed hard. He'd never been the kind of man who expected grand gestures. Birthdays, anniversaries, he usually kept them simple. A card, a dinner, maybe a walk with Emily along the waterfront. This, however, was different. It wasn't just a meal. It was effort, it was planning, it was love displayed in ways he didn't often see. Emily sat across from him, her eyes locked on his. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. It wasn't an awkward silence, it was heavy, meaningful, like both of them were standing at the edge of something unspoken. Finally, she leaned forward. "Ryan," she said, her voice low, "I know life hasn't been easy for us. I know there were times you felt far away, and times I thought you had stopped seeing me. But tonight, I want to remind you of who we are, of why we're still here." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to respond, to tell her that he had always seen her, even when he didn't say it. But the lump in his throat held him back. Claire's hand brushed against his shoulder as she placed a glass of wine in front of him, breaking the moment just enough to steady his breathing. They began dinner, the food warm and comforting, roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, vegetables tossed with herbs. It was simple but perfect, the kind of meal that carried the taste of home. Ryan ate quietly at first, letting the flavors settle on his tongue, listening to Emily and Claire exchange small comments, laughter mixing with the crackle of candles. Slowly, he allowed himself to relax. As the meal went on, conversation turned lighter. They shared stories. Emily recalling the time Ryan tried to fix a leaky faucet and flooded their bathroom. Claire teasing him about how seriously he took board games during family nights. Ryan found himself laughing, real laughter, the kind that escaped before he could control it. It had been too long since he felt this ease, this simple joy in the presence of the two women who knew him best. Then, just as he was beginning to think the night was only about food and laughter, Claire reached under the table and lifted a small wrapped box. She slid it across the cloth toward him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Ryan froze, staring at it. Gifts were rare between them, practicality usually won over sentiment. He looked at Emily, but she only smiled, encouraging him to open it. With careful fingers, he pulled apart the paper, revealing a wooden frame. Inside was a photograph he had almost forgotten him and Emily on their second year together, standing on a cliff during a road trip along the Oregon coast. Emily's hair was wild in the wind, his arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. But what made his breath catch was the writing along the edge of the frame. In neat looping handwriting were the words, "For the man who showed us what love really looks like." Beneath it were both of their signatures, Emily's and Claire's. Ryan's chest tightened. The weight of unspoken memories pressed down on him. You remember that trip, the rain, the cheap motel, the arguments about directions. The way Emily had cried when they finally reached the ocean because it was more beautiful than she imagined. He had forgotten how alive they had felt them. Now, holding the frame, he realized the sisters hadn't just given him a picture. They had given him back a piece of himself, a reminder of who he had been when love was new and wild. He looked up, eyes stinging. Emily's lips trembled as if she were holding back her own tears, while Claire watched with quiet pride, her hands folded neatly in her lap. For once, Ryan had no words. He could only nod, clutching the frame like it was more valuable than gold. The room grew still. The music played softly, the candles flickered, and Ryan felt the shift deep inside him. Tonight wasn't just about celebrating a date on a calendar. It was about reclaiming something lost, something he hadn't even realized was slipping away. Emily reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Do you see now?" she whispered. Ryan nodded again, unable to speak. He had expected a simple evening, maybe a toast, maybe a kiss before bed. Instead, he was being reminded by his wife and her sister that love wasn't ordinary, that it demanded attention, that it could still surprise him after all these years. The night wasn't over. Something told him this was only the beginning. Ryan sat at the table, the frame heavy in his hands, his heart heavier in his chest. The photo seemed alive, pulling him back to a version of himself he hadn't visited in years. He could almost feel the ocean wind on his face, the sound of Emily's laughter rising above the crashing waves. That trip had been messy and imperfect. Yet, looking at the picture, it seemed golden, like love had been enough to carry them through anything. Emily watched him closely, her chin resting lightly on her hand. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything she wanted him to remember. She wanted him to feel again, not just go through the motions of being a husband. Claire, sitting beside her, leaned back in her chair with a faint smile, as though satisfied that the moment had landed exactly the way they had planned. Ryan finally set the frame down carefully. Like it was fragile, his voice cracked as he said, "You two planned all this for me." "For us," Emily corrected softly, "but mostly for you, because you forget sometimes what you mean to us." Those words struck harder than any argument they had ever had. Ryan had always thought of himself as the provider, the steady one, the man who made sure the bills were paid and the car ran smoothly. But love was not just about keeping things in order. Emily was telling him he was more than practical duties. He was the heart of something bigger, and he had let himself forget. Dinner faded into the background after that. They lingered at the table sipping wine, letting memories take over. Emily told the story of their first road trip when Ryan refused to stop for directions and they ended up driving in circles for 2 hours. Claire laughed at the memory of him pacing nervously before proposing, practicing the words until he nearly lost his voice. Ryan listened, each story a reminder of the man he used to be, the man who loved recklessly, laughed loudly, and believed that tomorrow was always worth dreaming about. At one point, Claire disappeared into the kitchen and returned with dessert, a chocolate cake, small but beautifully decorated with "Happy Anniversary" written in looping white icing. She placed it down in front of them with a grin. "You didn't think I'd come empty-handed, did you?" she teased. Emily cut the first slice and slid it onto Ryan's plate. "This night isn't about grand gestures," she said quietly. "It's about us remembering what really matters, and I needed Claire here because she's been part of our story too. She's seen us through the highs and lows, and she's the one who reminded me that sometimes love needs to be spoken out loud." Ryan looked at Claire, who gave him a gentle nod. He realized she had been their silent witness all these years. The one who saw the arguments, comforted Emily when she cried, laughed with them when things were good, and reminded them that family wasn't just about two people. It was about everyone who helped hold the pieces together. They ate cake slowly, the sweetness balancing the weight of emotions in the room. Ryan couldn't stop glancing at the frame on the table, the photo glowing in the candlelight. He thought about all the years that had passed, all the times he had buried himself in work, convinced that providing was enough. But looking at Emily now, her eyes bright but tired, he realized love needed more than survival. It needed attention, presence, and gratitude. When the plates were cleared, Emily rose from her seat and walked around the table. She stood behind Ryan, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. Her cheek brushed against his hair as she whispered, "I don't want to lose what we have. I don't want us to forget how lucky we are." Ryan closed his eyes, her warmth sinking into him. For a moment he couldn't breathe. He wanted to tell her everything he felt. The guilt for drifting, the gratitude for her patience, the fear that maybe he wasn't enough. But before he could speak, Claire's voice broke the silence. "You two have been through more than most couples I know," she said softly. "But that's what makes tonight important. It's proof that love can last if you fight for it." "Ryan, Emily's right. You don't always see yourself the way we see you. You've held this family together in ways you don't realize." Ryan opened his eyes, staring at Claire. There was no judgment in her expression, only sincerity. He realized then that this night wasn't just a celebration. It was an intervention of love, two women reminding him of who he was and what he meant to them. He swallowed hard, voice hoarse. "I didn't know you both felt that way." Emily leaned closer, her lips near his ear. "That's why we had to show you." Words weren't enough. Ryan finally stood, pulling Emily into his arms. She clung to him, her shoulders shaking with quiet emotion. For a long time, they stayed like that, holding on as if the world outside didn't exist. Claire watched silently, her expression soft, almost protective. When Emily pulled back, her hands rested against his chest. "Promise me something," she said, her eyes searching his. "Promise me you'll remember this night whenever life feels too heavy. Promise me you won't forget how much you mean to us." Ryan nodded, his throat tight. "I promise." The candles burned lower, casting the room in a softer glow. The framed photo remained on the table, a silent witness to the vows spoken without rings or ceremonies. Ryan knew the night wasn't over, but already he felt transformed. The man who had walked through the door earlier, tired, distracted, unsure, was gone. In his place stood a man reminded of his worth, reminded of love's quiet power. As they sat together on the couch afterward, Emily nestled against his side, Claire sitting nearby with a contented smile. Ryan realized the true gift wasn't the photo or the dinner or even the cake. The gift was the message behind it all. He was loved, not for what he did, but for who he was. And for the first time in years, Ryan believed it. The candles had burned low, tiny rivers of wax sliding down their sides. The music still played, soft and steady, filling the silence with something fragile and tender. Ryan sat on the couch, the framed photo resting against the coffee table, a quiet reminder of everything he had just promised. Emily leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, her breathing slow and steady. Claire sat across from them in the armchair, legs folded under her, a knowing smile on her lips. For a while, no one spoke. The kind of silence they shared wasn't heavy, it was full. It was the silence of people who had already said the things that mattered, who no longer needed to fill space with words. Ryan stared at the flicker of the candles, thinking about how close he had come to losing the feeling of nights like this. Life had dulled his edges. He had let routine strip away the small moments, the laughter, the glances that once set his heart racing. But tonight it was all coming back. Emily lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Do you remember," she whispered, "our very first night in this apartment? We had no furniture, just boxes everywhere. We slept on the floor with one blanket and still thought it was the best night ever." Ryan smiled faintly, the memory hitting him hard. He could still feel the ache in his back from the hardwood floor, but more than that, he remembered the excitement, the joy of beginning something new. They hadn't had much, but they'd had each other, and back then that was enough. "I remember," he said quietly. "I thought, long as you were there, we could live in an empty apartment forever." Emily's eyes softened, glistening in the dim light. She reached for his hand and squeezed it. "That's the man I fell in love with, and that's the man I know is still here." Her words pierced him deeper than she realized. He thought of the times he had been distant, distracted, lost in work or in worries he never spoke aloud. He thought of the nights she must have waited for him to notice her, to look at her the way he used to. And still, she was here, holding on, giving him the chance to remember. Claire shifted in her chair, leaning forward. "You too have something rare," she said softly. "I've seen couples give up over less, but you're still standing. That says something about the love between you." Ryan glanced at her, gratitude filling his chest. Claire had been the observer, the sister who had seen more than either of them realized. Her presence tonight wasn't random. It was deliberate, a reminder that love wasn't just between two people, but woven through family, through the ones who cared enough to hold them accountable. Emily stood then, her hands slipping from his. She walked toward the shelf by the window and picked up a small notebook. She returned to the couch, opening it carefully, the pages filled with neat handwriting. Ryan frowned in curiosity. "I've been keeping this," she said, her voice trembling. "Journal. Not every day, just when I felt something I couldn't say out loud." She handed it to him. Ryan hesitated, then began to read. The entries were short, sometimes just a line or two. "He works too much, but I know he loves me. I miss the way he used to hold me without a reason. I hope he knows how proud I am of him, even if I don't say it enough." Each word cut into him, not with anger, but with truth. He felt the ache of her loneliness, the depth of her patience, the way she had carried the weight of their marriage in silence. His chest tightened as he turned the pages, each entry a window into the love she had guarded, even when it hurt. By the time he closed the notebook, his eyes were burning. He looked at Emily, who sat waiting, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Emily," he said, his voice rough, "I'm sorry for every time I made you feel alone, for not seeing you the way I should have." Her lips trembled and she leaned into him again, her forehead pressing against his chest. "I don't need perfect," she whispered. "I just need you to be here with me, not just in the same room, but here." Ryan wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if letting go would break everything apart. In that embrace, something shifted inside him. The guilt was still there, but it was joined by something stronger resolve. He would not let their love fade into silence again. Claire stood quietly, her eyes glistening as she looked at them. "I think that's my cue," she said softly, walking toward the door. "This night was for both of you. The rest you don't need me for." Ryan looked up, meeting her gaze. "Thank you," he said simply, and he meant it more than words could capture. Claire smiled, her hand resting on the doorknob. "Take care of her. Take care of each other. That's the real gift." With that, she slipped out, leaving them alone in the soft glow of the candles. The apartment felt quieter now, more intimate. Emily lifted her head, her eyes searching his. "You know what I wanted tonight more than anything?" Ryan shook his head, waiting. "Not flowers, not dinner, not even the gift. I wanted us to remember we're not just surviving, we're still building something. Every day we get to choose each other. That's what matters." Her words struck him like lightning, simple yet undeniable. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Then I choose you," he whispered. "Every day, even on the hard ones, especially on the hard ones." And Emily smiled through her tears, and for the first time in a long while, Ryan saw the woman he had fallen in love with on that cliff by the ocean, the woman whose laughter could shake the sky, whose strength carried them both through storms. He kissed her forehead, and in that moment, everything else faded, the worries, the regrets, the weight of time. They stayed there curled together on the couch as the night slipped away. No grand finale, no fireworks, just the quiet truth of love rediscovered. Ryan knew life would not suddenly become easy. There would still be arguments, still be days when work consumed him or when silence stretched too long. But tonight had reminded him of the promise at the core of it all, that love, when chosen again and again, could endure. As the last candle flickered out, Ryan held Emily close and whispered the only words that mattered. "This night I'll never forget it." And he knew he never would.